Lovely. So, picture a festival medical tent at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night. 20,000 people on site. The provider worked out the cover months ago using a formula on one page of a guidance document. Crowd of this size, therefore this many first aiders, this many ambulances. And right now, that tent is drowning because the formula never asked who the crowd was, what the weather did at 4 o'clock, or what happens when the headliner runs late. This is the argument we're unpacking today. Welcome to the show, my guest, Owain Davies, a founder of Better Event Medicine and author of Medical Provision for Events and Crowds, Evidence-Based Practice. So, great book, 500 plus pages, nearly 1,000 peer-reviewed sources cited, and a simple, quite uncomfortable message for our industry. Most event medical planning is done on gut feeling, and the gut feeling doesn't scale. Owain, welcome.
Hi, great to be here.
Nice to have you. Yeah. So, the first question really, your background is an unusual one for this field. You're a chartered marketeer and you've spent years making data-driven decisions across B2B and B2C markets. How does that commercial data-first mindset end up producing an evidence-based book about event medicine?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very fair question. So when you think of a marketer, obviously people would often think about, pretty adverts or maybe Mad Men, and it's not really like that for me. So I've always been a product marketer. So that isn't about selling things. That's about, well, what do we make? What should it be? And how do we best meet the user needs for whatever the particular product might be? So I've done it in different industries, but last 15 years or more, I've been doing it in healthcare. I've done things like triage, clinical decision support, including leading systematic reviews of evidence and data and trying to match up the evidence with what happens for the user experience. So, and across all that time, my 20 odd years of doing that, I've been spending my weekends doing medicine at events. So I've worked at more or less every level. I've worked on my own in a field, watching people race lawnmowers around. True story. Through to command roles at some of the UK's largest events. So for me, I do input to guidance. I've been working on the Purple Guide team for a number of years, doing the medical section for Purple Guide. And more recently, I've been one of the authors on the new Event Healthcare Standard, or National Event Medicine Standard. Overall, several years ago, I've been growing frustrated with that lack of evidence and loads of examples of the wrong cover. People will be familiar with that conversation. Well, can we just have like an ambulance and 4 first aiders, please? Well, maybe, but that may or may not be right for you. Maybe it's too little, maybe it's too much. I can't say. The whole lot work around, this is what we had last year. And to me, it's very, very frustrating as someone who really likes evidence and good user experience and good outcomes. So, probably about 3.5 years ago now, I decided to combine some of my skills in that research, those systematic reviews, the user-centered product design, and event medicine, which are all real interest areas of mine. So I started off, and I thought I was going to write some short guides. But it somewhat grew, and I realised that anything less than a full textbook is going to miss out massive chunks of information. So I set about doing it the best way I can, and reviewing thousands of bits of peer-reviewed information, journal articles, textbooks, and as you said, like nearly 1,000 of them are referenced in the actual book itself. But it's a really, really challenging area, so people need to prepare for those things, and it's challenging because there's at least 3 sets of things you need to prepare for. So there's the expected presentations. That's what you think you're going to get. Definitely. We're going to get some headaches and some blisters. And that's true of almost any event. You've got what's reasonably foreseeable at that event. So you have, and that really, really depends on the type of event. And even within music, what you reasonably foresee at a dance music event is different to what you'll see at a rock concert. Rock concerts, you'll get moshing. Dance events, you'll get MDMA intoxication. Those sorts of things. It's different. And then you do have to give some mind to what some people call the black swan events, the things that, well, you probably couldn't have reasonably foreseen it, but you've still got to be ready. I mean, some people would argue that black swans aren't there's nothing that should have been completely unforeseeable. But I mean, probably the best thing about black swan events is it was coined to say, well, actually, you're worrying about things that don't exist, and when it actually later turned out the black swans do in fact exist. So when they saw them, people were quite, the phrase existed before people knew black swans existed. So organisers and event medical providers work on the experience of things they have seen, and maybe they've been lucky. So if you're covering equestrian cross country, you might have only seen bruises or maybe a broken bone or two over runnings for several years, and great. I mean that would be normal, but last weekend alone, at the point we record this, 2 people died at separate equestrian events. So that's something, clearly it's foreseeable. You need to know that that's something that could happen at your event.
And were those, could they have been planned for those 2 deaths? Could have been?
I'm not familiar with the details of the care. I'm sure they got as good a care as those providers were able to give. But you've got to be prepared that serious things are going to happen at that sort of event, in a way that you're anticipating different things at equestrian cross country to what you might be at a marathon. I mean, loads of runs take place. Every weekend you'll see organised runs, and the same thing applies. Is that you probably won't have a cardiac arrest at the finish line of your event, but I can guarantee that a couple of events this year will.
Mm.
And you don't know if it's yours or not. And even medical providers fall into that trap. You need to be able to evaluate the risks individually for the event, not just rely on what it is that you think you might have seen last year or those sorts of things.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Well, in the book, you draw out attention that anyone in the events industry kind of recognises and we've seen this more and more, really. The organisers running a business, margins are extremely thin. I mean, we've seen some events cancelled, haven't we, this year because the margins are so thin. And the medical cover can look like a compliance tick box. Meanwhile, the provider is carrying the clinical risk. So how does the book bridge that gap? And what's the case to the organiser that event-based planning protects the bottom line and of course, the brand?
Yeah, absolutely. Event medicine is often a bit of an afterthought, just something, we've got to get that done. And the provider does carry some of the risk, but as an organiser, if you haven't done your due diligence and done a proper job of assessing whether this was the right cover for you, then you can still be liable for that. So people can make claims against your event because you didn't pick a good enough medical provider or didn't specify enough medical cover.
Right.
You just look at the Manchester Arena inquiry. The criticism was there of the medical provision on the night, but most of that was reserved for the organiser and the venue for not provisioning enough care. They did not take the care they should have taken to make sure that that there was sufficient cover in place. And you and maybe some of your listeners might be familiar with Reason's Swiss cheese model. The idea that you can think of risks through a series of Swiss cheese slices with the holes, and if the risk travels in a straight line, if it hits a hole, it goes through to the next layer. So it needs all those holes to line up for a risk to become a problem, a theoretical risk to be a problem. But medical provision, makes up at least 2 of those layers in terms of how you think about this for your event. And away from the actual risk piece, there's good peer-reviewed evidence that medical cover can improve the satisfaction with the event, can improve event loyalty, can improve word-of-mouth recommendation, and you can be sure that people who have a bad experience do talk about it on the internet and to their friends, and I went there and it was awful. That sort of thing gets around, and especially if it's a really bad outcome. I know of festivals and things who have folded after a death. So whole music festivals, and they have a death, and the following year they just can't run. It's that damaging to a brand. Even if the cover was good, that's the risk. That is the risk always. And then, of course, you've got things like your licensing. Will the safety advisory group and/or council or whoever looks after regulates your events, will they license your event again if it's found that your cover was substandard? And then you get to things like Martin's Law obviously coming in. Now that's specifically focused on terror risk, but the medical cover definitely plays a part in that. Are you adequately preparing for these major actually foreseeable problems?
Yeah, there's things like it will come into it, won't it? Because let's say there's an evacuation at an event and there's casualties from an acid attack or anything. You need to have enough medical cover within the confines of the building, don't you, to look after those casualties, because the ambulance service might not even be able to get to you at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when minutes count, when seconds count, the emergency services are only minutes away. For these mass casualty and major incidents, the prime responder is going to be your in-house team for at least a period, and that will depend on what sort of event it is and where you are. If your event is on Parliament Square in London, well, actually, there is loads of resource knocking around there from all the statutory services. If it's a festival in the middle of nowhere, you might be half an hour from the very first NHS ambulance arriving. Now, all the evidence suggests that good outcomes at mass casualty and major incidents, the best outcomes are associated with having all your priority 1 patients in hospital within 30 minutes. Now, if your NHS ambulance first one isn't there for 30 minutes and they will set up a command position, then the likelihood of that coming out well isn't great.
Taking your point as well about reputation of a venue, we talked a bit about this yesterday, that certainly since COVID, people seem to be more anxious. There is more levels of anxiety around when people go to venues like this. And even if they don't use the medical services that are there, if there's a visible presence, and a good representation, that can ease the stress and actually be a preventative measure, can't it, without actually calling on them?
Yeah, absolutely. Early intervention is important. So actually what happens is, there's really good evidence that medical posts and things need to be well positioned in high traffic areas, but not where there's crowds, avoiding some of the problems that Keith Still talked about yesterday. You're trying to make sure that if it's there and it's well signposted, your signs should be up in the air above people's heads. They should be green and white. They should use the international symbols. All of these things are associated with people seeking care earlier, which means that you head off the problems. So, take outdoor festivals, heat can be a major problem. And actually, it's much, much better if those people come and seek help when they're feeling a bit unwell, as opposed to when they actually become really unwell. That's a massive difference to it. So positioning your medical centres properly works very much in the favour of the organiser, and trying to make sure it's there, it's high profile. And you're right about the anxiety. I mean, a major trend for probably the past 4 years, maybe, has been a rise in people reporting that they've been needle spiked. Now, certainly music festivals this is, but I mean the peer-reviewed evidence is that there's no real evidence that this actually happens, but people worry about it an awful lot. So I'm not saying it. I'm sure it's angry people in the comments maybe, but actually, the evidence is by and large this isn't a widespread problem, but the anxiety about it is, and those patients present with real problems. So making sure that you have a medical team there ready to deal with it. Some festivals had problems with reputational risk, going, I'm not going to go there. I've heard that loads of people were needle spiked, or and I've worked at festivals where the rumour goes around that some people have been stabbed in the venue. Now, I know it's not true because we'd have seen them, and you end up having these conversations in the control room at the medical centres, just going, we're getting feedback that people have been stabbed, and security, you have your security, your CTV operator, and go, no, absolutely, we're pretty certain that's not happened, but that's the rumour, and that rumour, causes anxiety. That anxiety causes, real problems for some people, panic attacks. It can cause crowd movements. So, back to Keith Still again. It's a major. Something real doesn't have to happen. Whether it's someone setting off a banger, someone screaming because their mate pushed them. Because it was funny, but everyone thought they'd been stabbed. Those are real things that can cause an impact.
We're having a laugh about the police horse leaving a deposit, which caused the crowd.
Yeah, exactly. So the problem doesn't have to be real for it to cause a real issue for the event.
Absolutely, yeah. Thinking a little bit about tables now, this is probably the most confrontational idea in your book, and you published a blog about it this week as well, the reference table. Now, you mentioned that you do a bit of work for the Purple Guide as well. So just take that apart for us, that what you were talking about there.
Yeah, so I've been on the advisory group for the medical for Purple Guide for a number of years, but Purple Guide itself came about after some bad cases, and particularly there was Monsters of Rock, which is at Donington Airfield in 1988, and there were a number of deaths there. And people came to realise, well, they didn't really have good medical planning. There wasn't a good plan. So the reference tables, there's been Purple Guide's been through sort of two major styles and a load of iterations of that, and it used many of the right measures, so number of people and some of the risks, the season, that sort of thing. But the evidence is pretty clear that reference tables are poor at predicting needs for medical pieces. Often use opinion over evidence and quite quickly out of date. Part of the problem is that anything that reference tables are by their nature heuristic, by which I mean rule of thumb. You've got to take shortcuts. You've got to put things in wide bands because there are simply too many variables to do a neat table, essentially. So people who do like lots of stats crunching and things will be familiar with concepts like combinatorial explosion, which is a kind of a fancy way of saying, well, there's just too many variables. I can't make sense of the data. I'm trying to, So you see this in things like triage as well. If you take too many things into account if you're trying to automate triage, for instance, if you take too many things into account, the accuracy goes down, not up.
Right.
And it's kind of the same here. So you've got to strike a fine balance between using evidence and data, and then taking that with the experience and the knowledge that good experienced event planners have. And the result of having that is that reference tables lead to some organisers having far too much cover, and others having nowhere near enough. And going back to your earlier point, you see the organisers will arguments. We have these things going, well, Purple Guide says I only need this. That's all I'm paying for. Okay, I mean, maybe it's right, maybe it isn't, but doing a proper assessment for the event is the right thing. And for that reason, some time ago, we've taken Purple Guide took the decision to take the reference tables out. With much criticism from the industry. To be honest, people were going, well, actually, this is we relied on those, which is great, but relying on something that isn't accurate, it also isn't the right answer.
Kind of removes the ability to think through the process, doesn't it? In your event, you're just going across and down and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that process. So again, going to my fanboy listening to Keith Still yesterday, he said that it should be a red flag if you see just generic copy and paste used in the plan, and that's true of medical cover as well. Every event needs its unique assessment. So even an event that's been running a long time, variables change. So the amount of medical cover you need is affected by event type is by far the biggest influence on what we call patient presentation rate. So that's the amount of people per 1,000 that need help. But it's also things like weather. So every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature creates about a 10% increase in patient presentations.
All right, wow, interesting.
It's a really, really big effect. I'm sure you can see that in less than 10 degrees, because it's cumulative, less than 10 degrees of weather increase, and it's very important at the moment. It's quite hot here, and it's been quite hot everywhere. So if you run your event every year at about 23, 24 degrees, and this year it's 32 degrees, you may well see nearly double the amount of patients, and that's even if you kept everything else the same.
And the nightmare is one day it could be 20 degrees, the next day it might be 32, isn't it, in the UK?
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's the sort of thing that you need to be planning for, and taking your risk into account. Actually, having that information about the heat is really, really important. And actually, it's difficult, and I appreciate it's difficult for providers as well. But if you're planning your event, you get your medical cover sorted, let's say 6, 7, 8, 9 months in advance, and you want a fixed quote, which is great. apart from the fact that we've now come to the event for this year, and your medical provider should be looking at it going, yeah, we're in an unprecedented heat wave. Maybe we are going to need to up your number. And organisers, on their thin margins, don't want that. I understand, but that those are exactly the sort of thing where you're going to get people starting to complain, going, "Well, it was dreadful," and it feeds into a whole narrative in their head as around, well, there wasn't enough shade. Where was the water? Where I mean, even water is a great example. So where there's plentiful free water, it's good for patients or for not getting patients, but not having readily available free water is associated with approximately a doubling of patient presentations. So it may sound like a good idea. Oh, it's quite expensive to get this free water and get it all tested, get all the things done, but actually you could save that back on your medical costs. Because half as many people.
So that kind of brings us to the sort of the next point, like the sort of, so if you've done a medical plan 6 months ago, printed off, sent off in a PDF, emailed, approved, whatever, that brings us to the point about digital documentation, and that's your other life, really, isn't it, in digital products and things like that. But your book keeps coming back to the one idea that live data leads to the best decisions. Now, a bit of disclosure for me here, Safety, we have all documentation on a live platform, so feel free to push back on any of that. But on the event day, what does the difference look like between a medical manager working from a clipboard and a radio and a 6-month-old plan, and one working from live synced documents on a mobile device, for instance?
Yeah, so data and documentation, both really, really important parts of delivering on the medical cover for an event. And again, this is proportionate to the size of the event. If you're running a village fete or a village tea dance for 200 people, that's different to running a festival for 60,000. Of course it is. But having that information always helps. So a good medical plan should be based on the 3 parts, which is predicting the expected presentations. So that is what we've just talked about there, is how many people do I expect to be sick, because that's going to dictate how many people you need. So we know, again, from the data, that on average a patient takes about 20 minutes to treat. So it stands to reason that if you get 3 patients, that's an hour of staff time. So you can pretty quickly work back from one to the other to work out how many staff you need. Now, obviously, presentations can be different. Can be different patterns. They can be different severities. So pattern's an interesting one. So as an example, for multi-day events, on a 4-day event, you expect a number of presentations on day 1, whatever that might be. You expect day 2 to be double that, and you expect day 3 to be triple what day 1 was, and then day 4 likely to be back to what day 1 was again. And that's all to do with this sort of with various patterns to do with all sorts of things play into that. But that's a typical pattern at these sort of events. And obviously that's impacted by those live things like temperature. So if you're going to predict expected presentations, well, live data is going to tell you actually, well, the weather forecast has changed. We've got this is going to be hotter than we thought.
Yeah.
You need to predict the utilisation, so that's going to be, well, how many people are likely to need to go to hospital? Again, you can do that with data, but it will be impacted by some of the things that may be outside your control. So at music festivals, a major predictor of transfer to hospital rate, so how many people you have to take in an ambulance and go to hospital, is things like the drug consumption. And again, you get things like bad batches, and again, I mean, maybe counterintuitively, there's really strong evidence that the stronger your drug enforcement, the worse the outcome for patients. So you get more people presenting and they're sicker. If you put more searches in, more drugs dogs, more enforcement, you actually find higher rates of drug related injury. So very hard for an organizer in that respect.
Yeah.
But that sort of intelligence about what's happening there, that your plan needs to update. You need to be updating your plan in real time almost to say, oh, well, this is what's happening now, and that also counts for things like pollution. Whether that's actual pollution from a factory chimney, but also dust and things like that. So particulate rates.
Pollen count, would you factor in?
Pollen count, absolutely. external things like wasps. So insects also a major driver of outdoor events of biting insects, stinging insects.
Right.
And this is all stuff that should be feeding into what you do, because you don't just need the plan. So you've got your presentations, your utilization, and then you resource for that demand. And obviously, you may or may not have that. Your resource may or may not be fixed. Mostly it is, because actually it can be quite difficult to call in. Well, actually, I need 10 extra people. Can you find them? Will the organizer pay for them? All difficult things. But so in addition to your actual plan, you need things like a surge management plan. So what happens if or sometimes when demand is higher than we thought it would be? Because that's going to happen sometimes. Best data in the world, you do your planning based on evidence, but sometimes it will just be higher, based on things that you didn't know, or maybe could have predicted. But again, quite often you see that the medical teams and like the safety teams and those sort of things are not necessarily working as closely as they could do or ought to. So stuff like dust and insects and pollen are all things potentially that the organizer and the safety team could have done something about to prevent the medical problems. But very rarely do you hear those conversations happening in advance and going, okay, well, have you got a plan for tractors towing water bowsers to damp down the paths so the dust doesn't come up? Have you got can the organizer talk to the farmer next door and make sure he cut down the rapeseed before the festival happens? That's he's probably going to say no, but you can at least plan for it and know that there's a field of rapeseed there
and document it.
Absolutely right, of course. So all these things feed into it, and then that gives you that workable medical plan. And there's also things like you mentioned earlier about what happens. You might need extra space if loads of people suddenly go down. Maybe it's a mass casualty, maybe it's a bit below that, but it's loads of people suddenly go down with heat. Now, I've definitely seen plans which will say, okay, well, if the open medical centre is overwhelmed, we'll set up essentially a forward post in one of the bars. Does the bar manager know that? If the medical team leader walks in and goes, cool, we need to clear this out, and does he know what to do? Do the staff know what to do? Are they going to help? Are they going to? More likely, half an hour of confusion will ensue, where there's radio messages going back and forwards on 7 different channels, as nobody really knows that was supposed to happen, and what they should do about it when it does. That surge demand plan. Well, there's things you can do. You can start to do proactive messaging. So, good medical planning. You'll have some of these messages pre-planned. So, things like heat, pollen, all those sort of things go. A lot of festivals or things like that have apps now. And you can do push messaging, or you can put it on the screens, or you can announce it on the tannoy, or whatever your method is. It doesn't matter. But actually, you can have pre-prepared text and images. You can have pre-prepared scripts. All those things. Now, that's not the medical provider's job per se, but they need a strong input into it and about the things that you want to have planned. To say, actually, we are, ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing a particularly high demand at the moment, caused by dust on site. If you can help yourself, there are sinks by all the toilet blocks where you can wash down your own faces. If you still need medical help, our team are here, and they're by Blue Gate, or that sort of proactive messaging, and it helps stop the panic. So again, I'm going to go back to Keith Still yesterday, and he was talking about, well, what difference does it make that one guy at the front on stage going, okay, everyone, I know the power's gone out, but we're going to sing a cappella for a bit.
Yeah.
But the same thing applies to all sorts of medical situations. It's not just crowd movement. It's that planning, and that's all fed by data. So, that's data from weather, data from traffic, even data about your medical demand. How many people are in the medical centre right now? Data about the crowd flow. So if you've got crowd experts on there, all this data gives you a much better chance of giving people who might become ill or injured a good experience. Reflects well back on your event, and that sort of thing, and then that extends on. So the other thing that every event really ought to have, every big event certainly, is a patient access plan. So this is something you rarely see, but it's really, really important. So that's the idea that patient access plan is how you're going to easily identify your patient. Now imagine your field full of 20,000 people. Your patient's there in the middle somewhere, and that's fine. But how are you going to find them? Some events have spotters. up in towers. Some have drones, all those sort of things. I've sat there watching CCTV. I mean, a good example. I was in the control centre for a festival, and we got called by the local NHS ambulance service, in fact, to tell us that there was a cardiac arrest just off site. So just off the perimeter line of the event, there was a cardiac arrest. They had reported, and they were probably 20-25 minutes out. So I was sat there, and also with me was the police drone operator. So he immediately got the drone in the air, and actually, we could find it because it was quite complicated. There were steps, and within 30 seconds we'd located the cardiac arrest with a bystander doing CPR, and I was able to guide the ambulance out of the festival site and tell them exactly, okay, turn left now, because that is next left, and we got a return of spontaneous circulation. So the our intervention by our team, got their heartbeat back, which is great. So but that's that integration of live things. You need to do early assessment, so you need to get a team out to find out, to assess them. But even in a crowd, the most you can go, so the recommend in all the literature pretty much, it's recommended you should be able to get your medical team to assess a patient on site in about 4 minutes or thereabouts. That's the recommendation. Now, it's not always going to be possible, depends where they are, but in a main event site, 4 minutes. That is 200 metres in real money. So the walking speed in crowds, 4 minutes, is 200 metres. So that means that where you position the medical centre, really important. And actually, crowd dynamics will change that. So when you've got that information coming in about crowd flow, so a good example, like agricultural shows, if you've ever been to one, you quite often find they shut whole walkways so that the tractors or the cows or the llamas can come through to do their parade in the main ring.
Yeah.
So what you find all of a sudden is there's a big barrier cutting the site in half, basically, and you can't get through. So obviously good planning means that actually that live data in your updated, you go, well, you should know when that's going to happen, and actually maybe you need to move people, equipment, maybe a vehicle. They should be the other side of that obstruction before the obstruction happens, because it's happening.
Yeah. So the importance of live documentation, really.
Yes, I mean, some of that is pre-planned documentation, because you've got a schedule, but the live bit is actually, quite often, cows is delayed 20 minutes because the judging hasn't finished in the cattle shed.
Yeah.
So, actually, the difference that makes on live data is really, really big. Now, obviously, if you're doing these things on the fly with just your radio in the med centre, where you can make notes, you can have bits of paper lying around, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what's happening now, and it's not a shared view. So, at the point, and can you guarantee that the chief steward on cattle is going to tell you that the cows is running late and therefore the parade is delayed? And sometimes you get that information, sometimes you don't.
Well, you've given us a good idea there, actually, because with the medical plans that we have on SafetyDocs, which are live, obviously they're updated right up to the event. They can be downloaded in case there's mobile phone issues or something. But for one client, we actually built in weather into the medical plan. So in the top left, there was a box showing the latest weather. Now we could have one for pollen. not done that before. But then that document also feeds into other documents, as you mentioned, doesn't it? Like the patient access plan, other documents. So really, if you're able to create something which is a master plan, medical plan, but then when that changes, it also changes the other documents, like risk assessment, like Keith was talking about yesterday. A risk assessment should be specific to the venue and not cut and paste. So if somebody collapses, like right in the middle of the crowd, that's one risk assessment. If they collapse by the medical tent, it's less of a risk, so you've got to have different risk assessments. So it's important that when one document changes, the other changes as well. And like you touched on, you might not be able to do anything about that in terms of bringing more staff instantly, but it can certainly go on to like the pre-shift briefings, can't it? So the team events, we've got this situation, we've not got the extra medical cover, but what can we do to mitigate any potential need for extra resources.
I mean, it also means working across the other providers on site. So security is a big one. Now, you get things. So there's good evidence that sometimes security don't always do the right thing for the patient because they expect the medical team to turn up quickly. And again, it's fine, they know where the patient is, but that's got to be communicated from them to the controller. And I mean, most professionals are a bit better than the public. We're by a green tent. I can see a tree. And you've got to describe where the patient is. Then you send someone out and all those sort of things. Actually, there's pretty reasonable evidence that security teams. Well, if you find a patient, well, if they're awake and you're talking, well, you're actually better if the security team bring that patient to the nearest first aid post because they should know where that is. Or if they're in the crowd, maybe security could help just drag them out where the medical team can find them. And if they are, if they're there and it's really serious, maybe they're not breathing. Well, actually, they need to start CPR. There's evidence that security don't start CPR even though they're all trained. All the SIA staff are trained. They don't start CPR because the medical team will be here in a minute. And that's bad for outcomes. But having that shared understanding of what everyone expects from each other, and some security will be willing to do some things and some won't. But there's evidence that where you work together and you have those shared plans. So actually, that should be the medical team should be feeding into what the security plan is, and vice versa. I mean, there has been a bit of a rise in companies trying to do both, and I have thoughts about that certainly. But there is evidence that sometimes that doesn't produce the best outcomes, especially if they're trying to do both at the same time. Some people have quite a negative reaction to security guards, rightly or wrongly. So when you have a problem, the security guard approaches you to help you treat the problem, or what looks like a security guard to you, maybe but they, because they're in a security uniform, they're less likely to approach for help early. They're like all these things that it's worse outcomes. So I'm not saying one company can't provide both, because of course they can and they could be competent, but having some thought about that division is helpful sometimes.
One thing that you cover in the book, which is quite a stark statistic, and it's going to be more of I was seeing it more of a problem, especially when budgets are tight, and that is we don't need to hire all the radios because we'll just use our mobile phones. We've got a WhatsApp group, for all the stewards and so on. But you make the point that mobile phone infrastructure fails in over 60% of cases because the crowd overloads the network at exactly the moment responders need it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's a problem both on site and off. So, you've got, any of the sort of GSM communications that's something that you need something better. So again, a lot of people use these sort of GSM radios still, but they send like burst messages over GSM. But again, those can also be affected and they can go down. Right. And it's a problem for getting the help. So, say something really bad's gone. The stage has fallen down. The first thing that will happen is 100 people will hit 999. And all of a sudden local 999 capacity starts getting spread out, and then the local ambulance and fire and police controls will all of a sudden become overwhelmed with calls. Now, if I'm the commander, I need to pass my methane message. I can't get through on 999 because it's blocked. So the one person who you needed to tell the emergency services what was happening can't get through if you're relying on 999 to do that, which a lot of people do. You need a better way. Absolutely trying to get that information through is really important. But on site, absolutely, you need robust communications. And again, there are ways you can do it. Like people don't think actually medical teams at almost every event need some sort of internet, and that's some of that is communication and emails and passing information. But other parts is like looking up looking up toxins maybe, or checking protocols for a rare presentation, that sort of thing. So and yet it's not often and actually a good number of providers now use electronic patient records. So actually, if they haven't got good, stable, dedicated internet, they've got to be able to do this in a way that also doesn't expose that private information. So chances are that, especially at a big event, your medical provider is going to need a dedicated internet, their own internet piece which works. And if they're using sort of mobile phone based, radios and things like that, well, maybe they would work if the Wi-Fi was working. But you have both compensated and uncompensated events. So uncompensated major incidents where the infrastructure is affected. So if the stage falls, well, all the repeaters which were mounted on that stage and just below have just gone out of commission. So you've now got a massive black spot in your comms.
And that kind of brings us on to the next question, because major incident declared, then we're taught, aren't we, methane, which major incident declared, exact location, the type, the hazards, the access, number of casualties, emergency services required. That's a lot of information, isn't it? Over radio, under extreme pressure, we've all been there. Repeat, you can't pick up the radio message. There's a lot of noise going on. Have you thought much about this, how maybe digital platforms could help in that sort of situation? I'm not saying we've got an answer, but,
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's definitely things in there. I mean, part of it is that actually most of methane is already known to you. So, those sort of things are designed for instance where you're a responder of any of the emergency services turning up at, a coach full of nuns which has crashed off a bridge, or whatever other casualty storyline you wish to insert in the problem. But actually, we know a lot of this in advance. So your documentation in your planning, a lot of this is sort of pre-done, and we also know the type of major incidents that are most likely to happen at events. In fact, actually, some which kind of only happen at events. So actually, stuff like some of the crowd problems, it's very much an event problem. It can happen in other places for some reasons, but by and large, it's very much an event problem. Crowd movement injury, crowd crush injury, very much associated to events. And we know the proportions roughly in which they appear. So again, also terror, same piece, Martin's law. We know that events are the place where that is likely to happen. That is what is targeted. The same for things like heat and mass heat injury. People don't tend to get heat injured going about their everyday business because they'll go to the shop, they'll come back, I'll feel a bit hot, I'll sit down on the sofa, I'll be fine. But in an event, you're out in the blazing sun possibly, and you can't modify your routine or do the things you'd normally do, so your coping mechanisms reduce and maybe go away. So we know major mass casualty major incidents are absolutely foreseeable at events of pretty much all sizes. And both organisers, medical providers, safety officers all need to accept the fact that it is reasonably foreseeable that it will happen. Maybe it won't happen at your event, and I hope it doesn't happen at your event. But you need to be ready in case it does. There was a trend a while, for funny T-shirts, and I definitely had a friend who had an ambulance funny T-shirt. It was like, I don't want you to hurt yourself. I just want to be there when you do. That was the. But it's a bit like that for this medical planning. I don't want a mass casualty incident at any event. That's and obviously safety officers and organisers do as much as they can to make sure that doesn't happen. But sometimes it'll happen at someone's event this year. And maybe it's yours, maybe it isn't. And but you need to prepare the fact that it is foreseeable. These things aren't black swans. They're not. It's not. Oh, I couldn't possibly. So Manchester Arena inquiry again. They should have foreseen that some sort of major issue like that could have occurred. And it didn't have to be a suicide bomber. It could have been a structural collapse. It could have been, all sorts of. It could have been a fire. It could have been the gas tanks behind the bar exploding. Any of these things it could be, but that's but they hadn't sufficiently planned for the fact that it's foreseeable that something would happen, and especially at events where you have lots of temporary infrastructure. So structural collapse doesn't happen very often out in the real world. It happens quite a lot of events because it's all rigged temporary in situ. Lots of things happen at events in ways that they don't happen elsewhere. Even things like cardiac arrest. So, it's overall per sort of 100,000 people, it's 4 times more likely at an event that you'll get someone have a cardiac arrest than it is when people just go about their normal everyday business. Which is a lot. It's a huge difference. So you need to have defibrillators. You need to have. It's reasonably foreseeable because it is higher risk. as soon as people come out to their event, coping mechanisms go down, and you see this rise in the baseline level.
Yeah, and it really, I mean, we've talked about documentation being available in an emergency, but we shouldn't really be relying on having documentation when something happens. We should be prepared, shouldn't we? So people should be familiar with the processes, the documentation, the venue, the event. They should all be familiar. They should have walked the walk. They should know exactly what to do when those situations happen, shouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so the event plan shouldn't say, Commander will pass the methane message to the emergency services, and you can do it. Obviously, exact location. Well, the exact location isn't necessarily, name of festival at this postcode. It might, if you've planned well, you go, well, actually, it can happen here, it can happen there. If it's a bus crash into a crowd, well, that's going to happen at the transport centre. That's over here. So what does that look like? How is that different? But you can have all this pre-prepared. So you can have your aid memoir files. We're actually going, okay, so something has happened on stage 2. Okay, stage 2, right? Exact location is this. Access points are here, here, and here, which is different to what happens if it's on the main stage. It's different to what happens if it's in the camping area. So that generic look at what happens is different, and that goes back to the patient access plan as well. So a big site. Patient access plan is both for routine operations and for major incidents. But you have a patient. A patient can happen anywhere on your site, and they could be awake and talking. They can be walking. They could be unable to walk. They could be lying down. They could be unconscious. How are you going to get to and then move that person from any one of those places? And what if there's lots of them? What if a bit of the stage has collapsed and it's hit 4 of the sound operations crew? How are you going to get to that? What's the plan? It doesn't have to be wildly detailed, but just some thought about, okay, we're going to have a real problem if it happens there, because that's the. Do I have to send a vehicle off-site? Sometimes you have to send a vehicle off-site from the medical centre, round the perimeter road, and back in a different gate. That's quite common on some of these things, because you don't want to send vehicles through the. Last thing you want to do on almost any event is send a vehicle through the public areas. So you send it round the back, but do the gate staff know? Does the stage manager know? Or any of these things? And actually, that goes back to that shared documentation and that shared view of risk. And trying to make sure that everyone has what they need.
Which is kind of why what we promote with the platform that we use, that people have got it in them on the mobile devices. They can read it when they wake up at night, when they get up in the morning. It's there long before the start of the event, and they're familiarising themselves with all the types of things that you mentioned. So thinking about practical things then. So somebody's listened to this podcast on the way home, hopefully. Your book arrives the next day. What's the first thing they should do with the book? Because 500 pages, 1,000, peer-reviewed studies. How can they use it practically?
So the whole book is designed to be practical. So it's not the only book on event medicine out there. There are some others, but most of them take quite a sort of academic approach. I've deliberately tried to make this practical. So you'll see lots of things like, examples of good practice, examples of poor practice. Actual steps you can or should take. So, I think for me, if I wanted one thing, it would be people to understand that structured approach to medical needs assessment, and that structured approach to delivering a medical plan. So you don't need to read every single word. I mean, please do by all means, and but actually, understanding that 3-step that 3-step method of assessing risk for medical needs, really, really important. And that looking through some of the bits and seeing where it applies to their events. That's the long and short of it. So safety teams, planners, that sort of thing. They're going to be mostly interested actually in the first section, which is all about the planning, the numbers. How do I know if I've got the right medical cover, where it's going to go, and that sort of thing. The second bit's all about standards. So actually, that's what should a sign on a first aid post look like? What colour should my medical staff be wearing, and why is it green? All these sorts of things, and again, some of the things they might not have thought about. And then the third section is about that management. So that's about the that's all the things about, we've talked about some things like communicating with external services and, pre-preparing medical messages for surge demand, planning surge demand in general, those sorts of things. Section 3, and how do I do a patient access plan? What do I do to make one? How do I make it, and what should it say? So that's the sort of third section. And the fourth section's all about the mass casualty and major incidents. And actually, again, everyone, whether you're an organiser or a safety officer or a medical provider, should be familiar with some of those pieces to say, actually, what is it that we need to prepare for? And I try and reiterate every time that major incidents are foreseeable at events. Doesn't matter your size, and again, there is a level of scaling, but if we've seen anything, is that actually major incidents can happen even at some relatively small and insignificant looking events. Especially when you look at especially to the continent for some of the sort of more terror type attacks, ramming attacks on farmers markets and things like that. Now, if you're the organiser of a farmers market, you go, well, it's fine. People come. We're here with our tents in the square. We've got 50 people selling stuff from 20 stands, and a couple hundred people will be wheeling around. Okay, great, but that's unfortunately the world we live in. Is that what happens? What happens if that goes really badly wrong? Now, there for that farmers market, well, it probably isn't proportionate to have a major incident commander and things standing by. Of course, that's not proportionate, but that doesn't mean you can't have done some planning, about your methane message. Well, have your prompt sheet. Well, I'd forgive them for having a single version of that for a farmers market to say, well, actually, what is our exact location? What is the type? All these things planned out, and what is the entry exit point? All those sort of things planned out in advance.
Yeah.
But as soon as you get more complicated, you might need to have several versions or those sorts of things.
Well, we're going to put your link to your book in the description. I think I got mine on Kindle, but you can get the hard copies as well, can't you? Things like that.
Yep.
And what about if people wanted to reach out to you? I know they can connect with you on LinkedIn, can't they? Is there any other support that you offer, or anybody that wanted to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk to lots of people. I mean, I have a massive drive to try and make the industry a bit better. So that's I'm really passionate about trying to help people do better with their event medical provision. So got a website at bettereventmedicine.co.uk. Better Event Medicine, all one word. And there's a few blogs on there. When I recently started doing some blogs on it, and obviously that's also links to the book. And then always happy to talk to people and try and give a little bit of advice. Yeah,
brilliant. Good. Well, thank you, Owain. It's been really informative, as we thought it would be. We knew it would be. Yeah. So, evidence over instinct. So, plan on the model, run on live data, and assume the network will fail at the worst moment, because it will. Owain, thank you. The book link and episode notes are in the description, alongside our previous episode on crowd science and the work of Professor Keith Still. Two books that belong on the same shelf. I'm sure you'll agree, yours and Keith's. So, thank you for joining us, Owain, and we'll communicate again. But thanks for your time and all the best in your endeavours.
Thank you very much, and stay safe, everyone.
If you would like a free trial of SafetyDocs, please visit safetydocs.org.